Hello everyone and welcome to episode 31 of the House Detective Diaries. I have got an absolute chockers episode for you today. I am going to reveal how I tracked down the location of a house in Hamilton with only the name. I'm also going to show you basically a 1910s Bunnings catalogue. I'll be talking about a timber milling company that eventually moved into building houses, and I'll show you two surviving examples at Morningside that I uncovered. I'm also going to be discussing the history of William Wallace's house. And finally, I am going to be investigating why the heck there was fish on the roof of Brisbane City Hall. Hello everyone, I'm Marianne Taylor, also known as the House Detective. I'm an architectural historian and I research the history of buildings, houses, places and dead people basically. In these House Detective Diaries, I reveal my top 5 most interesting, unusual, quirky, bizarre finds from my house history research and share them with you. So I've got lots to cover in this episode, so let's get started. Number 5, the hunt for a house with only a name. A little while ago, I was contacted by a client who wanted to find out where her great-grandparents' house was located. She only knew 2 things. She knew it was in the Hamilton-Ascot area, and she knew the house was called Norvic, N-O-R-V-I-C. Now, I just love challenges like this, so I was very excited to take on this case. The first thing I did to start my research was I went to the digitized newspapers on Trove. I've mentioned Trove before, but if you're not familiar with it, it is a online repository of information and historical documents from all over Australia. It's managed by the National Library of Australia. But the main thing I use on there are the digitised newspapers. So they've got most Queensland newspapers digitised, most major Queensland newspapers digitised. But the best thing is that they are text searchable. So you can search for a term, you can search for a name, you can search for an address, that type of thing, and it will bring up records of that in the local newspapers. So I jumped on Trove, I entered Norvic into the search terms, and it brought up a few different records, but one of them was of particular interest. It was a 1919 ad for the sale of a house called Norvic, and it was located at Hamilton. So straight away I'm thinking, okay, this could be the right house. Now, although I was trying to find the location of the house, this ad was actually just pretty cool in general. It described the house, a number of rooms, the types of rooms, and this not only helped paint a picture of the size of the house, but also different things indicated to me that it was a pretty grand house and that the owners were fairly wealthy. So for example, it had a maid's room. So if you were wealthy enough to afford servants and have accommodation for them, then you were doing pretty well for yourself. The other thing was that it mentioned it had quite a large number of rooms, so it must have been a fairly big house. It mentioned that it had a bathroom, it had hot and cold running water, which was not common in Brisbane at all in 1919. And it also mentioned specifically that the bathroom had an enamel bath. So I'm getting this picture in my head that this was a pretty grand, pretty fancy house, basically. So that's just kind of interesting in a general perspective. But by far the most crucial piece of information in this ad was the actual land description of the house. So there's no actual address on this ad, but it does have the description of the block of land. So before the lot on plan system came in the 1980s, blocks of land were described in this super complicated way and painful way, where it basically started with the original portion of land, which can be tens of hundreds of acres. And then as the land was subdivided, the description of the land was basically described by the subdivisions. So it would be something like, so a suburban block might be described by something like re-subdivision 2 of subdivision 3 of section 4 of subdivision 5 of portion 33. So you can imagine as land got further and further divided, it became very, very cumbersome, this system, which is why they eventually swapped to the lot on plan system. So this is what we have in this ad. We have it listed as being on subdivisions 100 123 to 126 of allotment 8 of portion 2 in the parish of Toombul. And it's important to note the parish because within different parishes you could have the same land description, so that's one distinguishing feature. And I know that Hamilton was in the parish of Toombul at this time, so that's definitely confirming we've got the right suburb. So then, using this land description, I went to this fantastic collection of maps. They were drawn by a gentleman called McKellar, so I just call them McKellar maps. They were done in 1895, and these maps show the subdivision of land in Brisbane at that date, and they also mark on there the portion numbers and the subdivision descriptions, and often they will have the names of the residential estates if the land was divided as part of that kind of development. So I pulled up the sheet that covers Hamilton. I had a look for allotment 8, and then I searched within that to find these subdivisions, number 123 to 126. This placed Noorvik on the corner of William Street and Seymour Road in Hamilton. And when I looked at a current map of this location, I could see that William Street had become Blowery Street. So that's one thing to keep in mind as well when you're researching houses. Often the street names can have changed. So now I had this location. The next thing I did was go straight to Google Maps and have a look if the house was still there. Well, sadly, no, it's not still there. It's been replaced by a block of flats in what looks like around maybe the 1970s based on the style. So a bit disappointing, but never mind, not entirely unexpected. So the house isn't there anymore. So how do I make sure that I've got the right block and the right house and that this was actually Noorvik? Well, we know from that description in the ad that it was quite a large house. We know that it was well established by 1919, and we know that it was set in quite a large grounds to have all those facilities mentioned in the ad. So next thing I did was go to have a look at some historical aerial photos. So the oldest one available for Hamilton was 1936, and I pulled this up and had a look, and sure enough, there is a very big house with a rear wing situated in large grounds on this corner. So this seems to match on the surface the description of the house from the ads, and it looks like a fairly grand property. So that ticks that box. Now, I subsequently confirmed that this was the right house that had been owned by my client's great-grandparents by searching the post office directories and electoral rolls, and I found them living at this house in this location because the post office directories list residents in order of the houses with the cross streets, so I confirmed that. So I've confirmed that this is the right Noorvik, this is the right house, this is my client's grandparents' home. Now, if any of you are familiar with records for researching houses, or if you've watched some of my older videos, you might be wondering why I didn't just go straight to the detail plans, which are early sewerage maps, and see if the house name was written on those. Now, the reason for that is that families often took their house names with them to different houses, and there was often more than one house of a particular name. Now, Noorvik's fairly unusual. I wouldn't expect to find more than one of those belonging to different families. But in this case, the family actually built another house, lived in another house on Racecourse Road in Hamilton, and they took the name with them to that, Noorvik. So if I just looked at the sewerage plans, I would have seen that Noorvik on Racecourse Road and thought that that was where the house was located. So you can see there's a few little tricks and traps there, and it's always best to go back to the original land description if you can. And you find that land description on the certificates of title, the historical certificates of title for a block, which everyone can access for their own properties as well. So that was it. I had found the location of Noorvik. I had double checked that it was the right place by finding the family living there, and I had emailed my clients with the results to let her know, and she was very happy. I was recently hired to research a house, and this is what I love about my work. I'm always learning new things. I'm always discovering new building companies, new architecture, a whole range of different things, new businesses, new aspects of Brisbane and Queensland history. So in this case, I discovered that this house had been built as a spec home. Now, by spec home, I mean a house that is built by a builder or a developer, and then it is sold to a client. So as opposed to someone buying a block of land and then hiring a builder to build them a custom house. So it still happens these days. So in this case, the builder had bought a whole area of land, had built houses on the blocks, and had then on-sold them. So by having a look at the certificates of title, I saw that a big chunk of land in this area had been purchased by Hancock Gore Homes Limited in 1940. So straight away, when you see a company name on a title from that era, it indicates that they were perhaps developing a whole area, and particularly because it was like about a 1¼ acres in size, this parcel. So they were unlikely to be building just one house. So straight away, I'm like, who the heck were Hancock Gore? I have never heard of this company before in my life, which is actually quite surprising. Some of you might have heard of them because they were a massive company, a massive, massive company. So I started having a look into them, and it just turned out to be such a fascinating history that I thought I would share it with you here. I also wanted to have a look into the company because the client that had hired me wanted me to try and find some old photos of their house or some original plans. So I thought, if I can have a look into this company, maybe find out if they still have an archive or if they're still operating, if they have a collection of their records are at the State Library of Queensland or something like that, maybe I can find an original plan or some old photos of these houses for my client. Unfortunately, I couldn't, but I did learn a lot about the company in the process. It turns out that the origins of Hancock Gore Homes could be traced all the way back to the arrival of Thomas Hancock in Brisbane from Cornwall in England in 1856. He was a timber getter, and he settled in the Rosewood Scrub area, which is an area west of Ipswich. He settled here and he established a timber milling business that basically would absolutely take off from there. Thomas's sons Josias and Thomas Jr. joined him in the business, and it became Hancock and Sons. Then when Thomas retired and the brothers took over the company, it was renamed very unimaginatively Hancock Brothers. And they continued to grow and expand the business. In the 1890s, Tom then bought Josias out of the business and continued to run it on his own. Josias then moved to Brisbane and started his own company with his son, which he very imaginatively called Josias Hancock and Son. I hope they were good at timber milling because they weren't very creative with their business names, but anyway. And in 1901, a chap called Joseph Gore became a partner in the business, and you'll never guess what it was called. Hancock Gore. So that was the new name of the business. They kept expanding, kept growing. Josias Jr., I like to think of him being called Little Joe by his dad. He took over the business eventually, and he expanded it to 18 locations across Queensland, which is pretty impressive. One of their locations was actually on Ipswich Road at Woolloongabba, and I managed to find a couple of photos of this place with the help from Dale. Thank you very much, Dale. He did a little bit of research into this for me as well, and I really appreciate your help with that. Now, Hancock Gore had continued to expand the range of products that they manufactured and supplied, and in the Depression era of the 20s and 30s, they had actually also started to build entire houses, which I found really, really interesting because there's a few other companies that were building houses back then and providing kit homes and things like that, but I'd never heard of Hancock Gore. They then accordingly established sort of a subsidiary of the company, which was called Hancock Gore Homes. Seriously, guys, like you needed like a marketing manager. So Hancock Gore Homes was established and was registered as a separate business, and that's the company that bought this land that I had been looking at. That's the name of the company that was on their certificate of title. So in 1940, Hancock Gore Homes bought just over 1¼ acres of land at Morningside, and it seems like they built 9 houses on that area of land. once I knew this, the next thing I did was actually go and have a look at another look at an aerial photo of the area of interest. And surprisingly, only one of those 9 homes has been demolished in the time since they were built in the 1940s and 1950s. So I was pretty amazed by that because this area has seen a little bit of development. Obviously, they've all been altered and a lot of them have been extended, but the houses themselves are still there, which is really cool. So the owner that had hired me, as I mentioned, really wanted to find some old plans and some old photos of the houses. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any for their house, which is just so typical. But I did search the Corley collection and I found a few of the other Hancock and Gore homes in this area were on there, and they were relatively unchanged when the photos were taken. So this is a really cool insight into the style and the type of homes that this company was building at the time. I think you'll agree, just finding the history of this amazing company was, it was absolutely fascinating. Well, I thought it was fascinating. I hope you found it fascinating. Number 3, William Wallace's house. Up at Noosaville, which many of you know is west of Noosa and east of Tewantin, so located between Noosa and Tewantin on the Noosa River, there is an arts and crafts hub up there, and they are situated in a cool old house. And this house has a very interesting story, it turns out. And this story actually even explains the source of some of the street names in Noosaville, which was fascinating. Now, I covered the history of Tewantin, I think it was in episode 19 a little bit, so I won't go into too much detail, and this episode's already going to be pretty long. But basically, European settlers first came to the Tewantin area in search of timber. So a bit like old mate Thomas Hancock, similar to that, they would have come to this area to fell trees, and then they were often shipped to Brisbane for construction. Settlement grew at Tewantin. Yeah, like I said, I won't go into too much detail, but basically where Noosaville is now, and even Tewantin, became a bit of a holiday destination for people that lived at Gympie or who were on mining at the goldfields at Gympie in the early days. So people would come down here, maybe have a holiday house on the river. And that is basically how the early story of Noosaville begins. Walter Hay bought a number of portions in this area. One of them was portion 151. And this was a massive holding of land. It was just over 336 acres, which is about 136 hectares. And it had a really long frontage to the southern side of Noosa River. So extended from round about today's River Breeze Avenue in the east, all the way to Lake Dunella in the west, and then south to today's Eden Creek Road, basically, to give you an idea of how massive that was. He also had 2 other portions quite nearby, so a huge amount of land that this guy owned. And then on the peninsula, sort of directly opposite Tewantin, Frederick Goodchap had 80 acres of land. So again, a big holding of land, but nothing near what Hayes owned. In 1930, our friend William Wallace purchased a huge chunk of Hayes' former land. So it was about 32 hectares, which is just over 79 acres. And by this date, a number of roads had been formed through the land as well. Now, when I started to look into William Wallace's story, it was actually quite tragic. His parents had both drowned when he was only a kid. They were trying to cross a flooded creek and were swept away by the current. So yeah, that's a pretty horrible thing to happen to you as you're a child, to lose both parents, obviously. Once he completed school, William went to work on his uncle's cattle property. In 1901, he got married. He married a girl called Alice Elizabeth Dimmick, and she was a school teacher, and she was actually also the daughter of a former Mackay mayor, which is where the couple were living at the time. In 1904, William joined the British Government Colonial Service. Yes, British Government Colonial Service as a surveyor, and he was posted to the Federated Malay States. It was a British colony, and it's now part of what we call Malaysia. Anyway, after William eventually retired from his surveying jobs after living overseas in Kuala Lumpur with his family for a while, He comes back here and he basically decides to build a holiday house or a retirement home on his land here at Noosaville. By the 1930s, Tewantin and this Noosaville area are becoming a really popular holiday destination. So in 1929, a bridge was built from between Tewantin and today's Noosaville, which made access much easier to the coast and vice versa. And so Noosaville became a very popular place for people to retire to and to build holiday homes at, and that's obviously what attracted William and Alice to this area as well. As part of researching this house, I jumped onto Heritage Noosa, which is a fantastic online collection of historical documents relating to the Noosa Council area. And one of the greatest resources on this site is that the council minutes are on there, they're digitised and on there, but they're also text searchable. So when I ran a search for William Wallace, I found reference in one of these council meetings to the approval of plans for Mr. W.A. Wallace's new dwelling at Gympie Terrace. So this was almost certainly, obviously, his new house. And the house was actually designed by architect and engineer Ronald Martin Wilson. Now, it was quite unusual for a holiday house to be designed by an architect in this period in Noosaville. So that alone sets it apart. And he was quite a well-known architect as well. So he was the son of the much more famous and prominent and prolific Queensland architect Alexander Brown Wilson. And he was also his business partner for a time, which is really interesting. So this is a pretty special example, surviving example of this architect's work, but also an unusual one because of the location outside of a capital city. I haven't done a huge assessment of this, by the way. I haven't done a detailed research project into this, but based on my experience and what I've seen, this seems to be an unusual example of an architect design house in a small coastal holiday village. The house was built by Richard Cadell from Corroy, and the price was estimated to be £1,246, which I can tell you in 1930-31 was a lot of money for a timber house. So it's another indication of, I guess, how upmarket this house must have been, but also how large it was and how impressive for the time. And I mean, obviously getting an architect involved in designing a house at that time is unusual in itself and expensive. So very interesting from that point of view as well. As you can see, it's quite a big house and it's quite unusual. It's an unusual layout, it's an unusual style. And yeah, it's very, very interesting. We were moving into the multi-gable style by the interwar era. So from that perspective, it's a little bit old-fashioned, but there's certain elements that point to it having been built later, and that mainly is the board balustrade with the decorative cutouts. So that's a key style of balustrade that was really popular in the 20s and 30s, and also the bay window at the front. That's something you rarely saw in that style on earlier homes. So the style of the house that remains and the style of what was built is definitely interesting in itself from that perspective, particularly because it was designed by an architect. So you tend to think of architects designing like the latest styles and the most up-to-date styles, but in this case it seems like the client, William Wallace, has actually preferred an older style house. Anyway, just some of my random thoughts on this as we go along. So anyway, now we have an original plan for the house and we can compare that to what the house looks like now. And as you can see, it's a massive house. So you can see why it costs so much money. And yeah, he obviously did pretty well for himself as a surveyor in Malaysia. The story also goes, so the house was obviously built from timber and tin in true Queenslander style. But the story goes too that William was so impressed with the beautiful timber that was used inside the house that he actually decided to leave the interior unpainted. Pretty unusual for that time. Earlier, sometimes houses were left painted internally, but by the 30s and 40s, generally people were painting the interiors of the house. Paint was much more affordable and widely available, so interesting choice. And remarkably, these unpainted interiors have survived until the present. So that is just about unheard of absolutely unheard of. So that is one really remarkable feature of this house that survives. So the house actually remained in the Wallace family until 1978. And the story goes that even though they didn't own it anymore, the family remained living there for another couple of years. Apparently it was a rental property, and you know, there was rumours of it having been a brothel at one point, and apparently the locals referred to it as the haunted house on the hill because it was somewhat neglected by this time as well. And there's actually a report by a detective inspector that he suspected it was being used as a floating casino for a while as well. So a temporary casino, but apparently could never prove it or could never catch anyone in the act, which is interesting. So it obviously had a little bit of a colourful history in the 1980s and 1990s. The next phase of the house's history kind of brings it up to the present day. So in 1989, the house was included in a master plan that was commissioned by Noosa Council to create a sort of public space with the house as the centrepiece. And then the council eventually did buy it in 1992. The council did then redevelop the site and create a parkland and a sort of leisure area, and the house itself became the home of the Noosa Arts and Crafts Association. And the house was officially opened as the headquarters of this Noosa Arts and Crafts Association on the 8th of June 1993, and it now sort of sits in this 9-hectare community complex. And if you know the area, it also includes the Noosaville Library and the Noosa Leisure Centre. And as of 2026, still there. Its original style is still discernible. There's still a lot of original features, including those unpainted timber walls inside. So absolutely incredible home that you would probably, maybe you'd pop in and you'd do arts and crafts there and you'd have absolutely no idea of the intriguing history or story behind the house. And as I mentioned, quite a few streets in the local area have been named after people that are connected to this story of the house, which is also fascinating in itself, I think. Phew, how are we going? We've covered quite a bit of history in this episode, so for this segment I'm just going to show you some pretty pictures for a bit with a little bit of commentary. Basically, what I'm going to show you is the 1910 equivalent of a Bunnings catalogue, or a Bunnings website I guess these days. It is so cool. I came across this when I was researching pre-cut and prefabricated houses a little while ago, and I've covered that topic, I think it was in episode 13. And one of the companies that I discussed and investigated was a company called James Campbell and Sons, and they produced kit homes or pre-cut homes where all the components for constructing your own home were posted out to you or delivered to you, and you could, in theory, assemble your own house. Now, they only shipped their houses to rural areas, so you won't find any of these houses in the Brisbane area, but they were a massive company and the houses were really, really popular. So I came across this catalogue as part of that research, and I was just absolutely intrigued to actually see a catalogue from that time. So the catalogue includes basically every timber element you could possibly need to build a house, and then some. So there's all the different mouldings, like your cornices, your picture rails, architraves, skirtings, window and door sills, handrails, flooring, external cladding, even fence palings, and then your veranda brackets and internal archways, and then a lot of turned timber items like your balusters in your balustrades of your stairs and things like that. Fretwork panels like your breezeways that you'll find over your internal doors. What else have we got? We've got decorative barge boards for the outside of your house on the gables and under the gutters. There's even gates, there's fireplace surrounds and overmantles, there's windows, there's doors, there's basically everything. There's benches, and yes, there's even church pews and altars and pulpits. So basically everything you needed to furnish your house and or church, basically. But wait, you could even order an entire house. So as I mentioned, James Campbell and Sons produced a range of kind of kit homes, and amazingly, this catalogue includes some of these designs and the floor plans, which is just so cool because it gives you an idea of the types of houses that they were building in 1910, which I just think is absolutely fascinating. Eventually, James Campbell and Sons became really, really well known for their range of what were called ready-cut homes. So that was kind of the brand name of their pre-cut kit homes, and a number of catalogues of these houses survive from a little bit later, but these are earlier examples and they are just so fascinating, I think, and it was just really cool to see them. And I don't know, like they always promote the fact that the owner could build these homes themselves once they were shipped out, but I imagine that, you have enough trouble with, assembling a flat pack IKEA piece of furniture, right? So you can only imagine how much trouble people had assembling these kit houses if they didn't have any building experience. But it was such a successful scheme, and this company grew, I think it was established in 1854. Let me just check that. Yes, 1854. And it started off with James Campbell just selling building supplies, again, like our old mate Tommy Hancock from before, mainly timber. And then he branched out into hardware and every kind of item you could need in construction or building or everyday use. So basically, he was the Bunnings of the day, this James Campbell and Campbell and Sons. His company was incredibly successful and it just continued to grow and grow and grow, and he ended up having brickworks and pottery works and quarries, and he had his hands in every single aspect of the building trade. He even owned ships to transport his merchandise around the place and that type of thing. So it became a huge, massive company, so very, very much like Bunnings, although I don't know if he had sausage sizzles out front of his store. But anyway, as I kept scrolling through this amazing catalogue, it was the final page that was actually my favourite. Have a look at this fantastic photograph. So this shows the James Campbell and Sons building on Creek Street. So it was it's not there anymore, unfortunately. It was located between Charlotte and Elizabeth Streets. So basically where the junction of Eagle Street comes in, right near, those big fig trees there at the end of Eagle Street, and at the junction of Creek, Charlotte and Elizabeth Streets. Yeah, so it was right there. There's big shiny new places there now, but it was there, and you can see it in this awesome photograph from 1935. So I did actually double check because like I said, they were such a big business, they had multiple premises. So I wanted to make sure that this photo was actually of the Creek Street premises. So I found this old photo, and yes, you can see it here. The details match those in the background of the photo. But I also knew that I'd seen other photos of this building as well, although at the time I hadn't known exactly where it was located. So sure enough, I did another search and I found this amazing photo of it in 1890. And next door to it was the Queen's Hotel as well. And you can see that in the on the left-hand side of some of these photographs too, which is pretty cool. And this photo's from about 1865. So the change from that smallish timber building to this giant stone premises, which incorporated not only the Campbell and Sons business, but a whole heap of other tenants within the building, you can see how successful that company was and how quickly it grew. So yeah, I just thought I'd share these cool old photos with you as well. Pretty incredible. But the main reason I loved this photo was the fact that it captures some of the staff of the business. It is so unusual to have photos of staff from this era. And I'm assuming that the photo was taken around 1910 when this catalogue was issued, and the building was certainly there by that day. But isn't it incredible? Like, I just love all the people peeking out the windows and all their clothes, and there's actually a few women there, which I found quite amazing, the large number of women. Yeah, and I just thought it was really, really cool to see the people, and I presume some of them, or one of them, would have been a Campbell. Maybe the guy on the left with the white beard, he sort of looks like one of James Campbell's sons who took over the business, so maybe it's him. But yeah, I also love this guy leaning up against the column. He just looks like some cowboy out of a western. I don't know, too cool for school. But yeah, I just love seeing all the different people and all the different clothes, and just to see, as I said, a photo of the staff and put some faces to the people that were behind the scenes of these massive businesses. So obviously James Campbell and his sons get all the recognition, and they're the ones that are remembered. But behind the scenes, there were all these everyday people that were making this business a success as well. So yeah, I thought that was very cool, and I hope you enjoyed seeing it too. Number 1, why the hell were there fish on the roof of Brisbane City Hall? Well, it's a very good question. Were they the Lord Mayor's pets? No, they weren't. It was actually part of a citywide quest to vanquish an incredibly deadly and invasive enemy, the mosquito. That's right. These tanks were part of a massive program run by Brisbane City Council to reduce the plague of mosquitoes that were attacking the city of Brisbane. Dr. Hamlin Harris was the city entomologist at the time, and I came across his name because he was a resident in a house that I was researching at Corinda. And when I started to look into him a little bit more, I discovered this incredible history. So he ended up being a world-renowned specialist in reducing and controlling mosquito populations of all things. But basically, he was a city entomologist in the 1920s and 1930s. He'd previously been I think it was a director of the Queensland Museum. And he had been hired by the Brisbane City Council to run a campaign to basically reduce the number of mosquitoes that were plaguing Brisbane. So as part of this work, he was doing a lot of research, and this included investigating certain species of fish to see if they could be used to control the numbers of mosquitoes by eating the mosquito larvae. And this is what led to fish aquariums being installed on the roof of Brisbane City Hall. So it seems totally bizarre, right? Absolutely ridiculous. But anyway, that's the explanation for that. Now, if my high school biology serves me correctly, this kind of campaign where you're using one living creature to control another living creature or reduce the number of another living creature that's considered a pest is called biological control. Possibly the worst example of a failure of this kind of campaign is the introduction of the cane toad to control cane beetles in Queensland. It was the most epic fail you'll ever find probably in the history of biological control, as we all know, and we're still dealing with the effects of that these days. But this was one approach that was being taken to manage the mosquito plagues in Brisbane. Which then begs the question, did these fish actually work? What was the outcome of his research? Like, that was the first question I wanted to know. Maybe it's my science background, but I had to have a look into it. And there was no definitive answer, although, as I mentioned, he became world renowned for his research into mosquito control, but he was actually sacked by the council a couple of years after these experiments were being run. It seemed like one of the local councillors had an issue with him, and they reconfigured the department he was in and basically made his job redundant. Nothing changes. But basically, I think he was probably sacked before he could implement any programs to test these results that he'd had. I also found these absolutely horrifying photos of the council spraying mosquito infested areas with DDT in the 1950s. So I'm thinking that that became their preferred method of control. This one, oh my gosh, this one made me cringe so bad. This guy's just sucking in DDT. And we now know that DDT is such a horrendous chemical and causes so many bad health effects. So presumably this spraying was just as toxic to the council workers as it was to the mosquitoes. So there you have it, my top 5 most interesting finds from my house history research. I hope you enjoyed watching. Let me know in the comments what your favourite segment was. And if you haven't already, please click that like and subscribe button so you can help me spread the wonders of Brisbane and Queensland history and house history wide and far. And if you want me to research your house, let me know. Give me a call, send me an email. I'll put the link in the description below. But thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Coming up in the next episode, I'll take you through this incredible untouched house at Ipswich. It's a complete time capsule. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. See you then.